Right, the one team that I find actually really interesting, I wanted to know actually, especially when people who watch more games, is the Hanwa Life team, because this is the one where like without going into a massive tangent, basically like whatever the fuck actually did happen between CV Max and those Griffin players like 2 years ago, like does the ripple ever end? Does it ever end? Like that ripple is still going across the pond, fucking up more rosters. Like it just never ends. The impact of that like butterfly effect scenario, because if people don't know, obviously then some of them left and went to DRX, which is where CV Max went, and then after that they left DRX, and the CV Max is like technically on the DRX team, but he's like inactive because of the suspension. Like the whole thing's super complicated. But as a result, unfortunately, what it meant was you had that amazing Griffin team a few years back who had, that amazing ceiling, but they never really reached it. And then each of the teams since then is just like a sort of slightly weaker version of that, but still with some brilliant players. Like obviously, who the fuck doesn't like Deft and Chovy? They're a banger players, but you got to have more than that in a team. And for me, every team they had after Griffin was just, it always had like flaws even in the lineup. And then you could see that then they'd have to draft in some fucked up way to make it work in some weird context. Like the one they had last year was one of the weirdest I've ever seen from the team, because if people only saw Worlds, they didn't play anything like they did in Korea, like they did at Worlds. They almost played like an opposite style there. So I don't know where to come down this Hanwa Live team, because listen, Chovy is still a great player. Deft still has something left in the tank. Abaxiel, start me off on this one, because like on the one hand, I can see why there's some things to like about them, but I'm not really in on this team. Like I find it a bit of a weird like composition of a team,
Yeah, I think the first game I was watching, their top laner watched the other top laner drop a ward. And then 30 seconds later, their jungler walks over that ward. It's like, dude, you watched him. I don't know. I think the sport's decent, but I think overall they don't have it, and they draft really weird. Them and Brian are like the two teams that I think really ardent draft the most. I don't know. They just I think they don't have good fundamentals, particularly on top side, but just overall as a team. It's kind of hard to say more than that. I don't find them very interesting to watch.
I feel like for me, I've always been intrigued by them, especially because Hanwha Life has historically been a very weak team. This is like the best they've ever done, basically. Once you put this roster together, right? And like this is a team that has some really top talent on it, like in Chovy and in Deft, obviously. And then Vista is a pretty decent support that kind of glues that bottom side of the bottom trio together. But then you have like Arthur, who's from, actually most people don't know this, but he's actually from like the OPL. Like he's an Australian Korean player, right? Like he actually played in Australia and he came back, and that's like such a weird signing, right? For a team, it's like, okay, so we got Chovy, so we got Deft, but also we got an OPL player. Like we got an Oceania player. So I think for me, I was always really excited to watch Arthur. And then he started off great at the beginning of the season, and then he had a few rough games, and then they put Johan in. Johan's fundamentals have seemed like really bad in terms of like the games he's played recently. It almost feels like they're playing him just to see what happens. And now I'm like, Chovy he wins every time. Like he's up 100 CS almost every game. Like he wins lane in matchups he shouldn't win, and then Deft does fine. And if like they're winning, Deft gets to play the game and he crushes and he carries the game and it's beautiful. And Chovy's side laning and it's like, okay, this is it. DRX, say goodbye. Gen G, no way. It's Hanwha Life. Maybe they're the one that's going to the finals. And then Morgan just makes a mechanical error in the top side and dies, or rotates too slowly, teleports too slowly, and then Chovy dies, and then the team that they're playing against beats them because they're also playing with a subpar draft because their drafting is weird. And you're like, oh, this team has so much potential. And you watch Chovy, like, why did they put him in this matchup in mid? And he's up 20 CS, but he still can't win the game. It's just so frustrating.
No, I don't know. I think Johan has so little pressure on lanes. Like, I mean, Deft like kind of ints the laning phase and dies to ganks a lot. But like, okay, if you know that's your style, maybe like Johan can like adjust and like play around that and like cover bot lane. But he just doesn't cover bot. He just doesn't cover lanes. I don't know. Like, I mean, obviously, like this meta, yes, it's power farm, yes, it's carry jungler, but like still, like you can still cover lanes. You can still find time to gank and be effective. That's what good junglers do, and like he's kind of invisible for me. So yeah.
Deft, I mean, he definitely still has like his moments, right, where you look like, okay, his positioning is so good, his decision making is so good, but he has died isolated in the 2v2, even without ganks, right, so many times where he actually just takes a bad trade and walks into an Alistair, and you're like, well, you just die here, actually. Like, you misjudged the damage, right? It's like he's trying to play a champion from its like 2016 state and not its current state, you know what I mean, in terms of like the damage numbers.
He thinks he can auto space everything.
Yeah, exactly. So like, I don't know. I have high hopes for this team in general, or I had high hopes for this team in general, but recently they've kind of shown me that either they don't understand draft or they really want to experiment a lot. Like, they put Chovy on Lilia mid recently, which was really cool and it was really fun. I think that was against Nongshim and they crushed it and they won. And it's like, okay, well, you were going to win that one anyways. But like, then I watched them play like 2 back-to-back like all AD comps where like Chovy's playing Sion mid. And I'm like, oh, your opponent's team just counters that with armor and like, what was your game plan? It feels like the last lock-in on whenever I feel like I see a weak Hanwa Life draft, like the last lock-in comes through, and it's like at the last second too. It clearly wasn't a plan, and they're like, we'll pick this one, I guess. And you can see look on the player's face, where they're like, you can like see them sit back in the chair, and I'm like, oh, this was not planned. Like, this was not like, this is not some stick strategy, you know. This is kind of like, oh, I think we lost draft. I feel like I've been way less impressed by them recently than I was at the beginning of the season, and I don't know if it's experimentation because the gauntlet format is gone and your seeding doesn't matter as much, and they're not. I don't think they're actually necessarily secured playoffs. I'd have to check. I don't think they are technically right now, but like, they're probably going to make playoffs almost no matter what. So I could see like second round robin, you don't care as much, but like, it's time to tighten up if you want to have a chance of making the finals, because I just don't see it. I mean, I know you said you didn't think Genji was going to do it. I put Genji above them at the moment. Like, right now. Hanwa Life is not clean enough.
No, the other thing that kills me about this team as well is like, at this point in time, right, I know everyone who's a Chovy fan, like, listen, I was a massive fan of Frogger back in the day, so I can't talk shit on this. Like, they are just basically counting CS numbers, going, look, but he won in CS, and then what you do is you go, the rest of the team sucks anyway, so the rest of the match didn't count. You know, that was like the true, like, 1v1 part of the game. But the problem with that is this team looks like the worst example of that I've ever seen from Chovy, because individually, if I isolate him as only a mid laner, yeah, he's always one of the best in the world. Like, he's always in contention, usually for best in the world. He has a million fucking champions, plays all these matchups, he always has good CS. The problem I have is this. He's now been in 3 completely different teams where the same story plays out every time, which is like, all his fans, like, he's a genius who his team just doesn't know how to use him. It's like, brother, at some point in time, either a coach, your teammates, you have to be able to explain to them how to use you. Because one thing I don't actually like about Chovy's game in that sense is I've seen too many times where it does look like he's doing awesome individually, but either his team doesn't know what to do with it, or I have to speculate at this point in time, 3 different teams, or he doesn't know. Like, you know, maybe in solo queue when everyone's playing for themselves, maybe that works. But in some of these team games, like even some of the picks, like that Sion pick, mate, I still don't understand where that draft was. Like, who was going to win the team fights? Like, what? Zion, you know, and that's your best player in the whole server. In theory, if you're Hanwa, like, the one thing you can say every game is, if we give Chovy the right matchup, we have a chance. Like, that game's like one where I don't even understand the comp. So, like, give me some thoughts as a coach here, Abaxio, because on the one hand, I can acknowledge he's clearly a very talented player, but I also feel like I always think if you're going to be a superstar player, especially if you want to be selfish, you want your picks, you want things your way, you have to be able to explain to people how to use you, you know, like, at a point in the game where I'm the strongest, now, listen to me, I'll tell you which lane I need to go to, where we need to play, when we need to fight around me. Because if you don't do that, like, yeah, you can say it's your coach's fault, but it's also on you as well if you want to be a superstar player, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, that's all completely fair. I think that if you want to be the best as opposed to, like, be good, you have to, you know the team game in and out. You have to know, like, what your teammates should be doing at all times, because you have to understand your relationship to them. And so, like, yeah, you know, Chovy doesn't really, you know, roam that well, or, like, you know, use his pressure for the rest of the team. Okay, why? You know, is his jungler incapable of listening to him, or does he simply not say? Well, you know, there's a couple of possibilities within that, but it's not that complicated. You know, there has to be a weak link somewhere in there, and it can be Chovy himself. It could be that, yes, you know, guy's a genius 1v1, can beat almost anyone, but doesn't know what to do with it. That is entirely possible.
Because I know, just before fans just naively get this wrong, like, the key thing to remember with all games, especially a game that's as information, like, the burden is so insane, like League of Legends, it's not a linear game. You don't just, like, learn, like, right, well, look, he's this good, so he must know everything in these areas. Like, no, maybe his skill set is more tailored, or maybe the teams he was in didn't coach that way, or that's not even the vision he has of the game, you know? Like that's why I say, to me, I wonder how much of it's, like, solo queue stuff, because obviously in solo queue, he's, like permanently a fucking god, apparently, if you ever follow the Korean solo queue ladder, you know.
Yeah, he is, which does kind of make it odd, because you keep hearing that thing from various people within Korea, like, oh, if you want to be good, you have to, like, play every role in solo queue. You have to, like, have a strong understanding of that. Like, I think one of the earliest examples I can remember was like Mata. He had, like, supposedly, like, all five different accounts, one for each role, and stuff like that. But so, like, I do think there's some truth to that, because ultimately, like, if I'm going to understand, like, okay, if I roam now, it allows the bot lane to do this. If I, place vision here, it allows my teammate to do this. If I go in right now, I, like, mess with this guy so that he can't roam. I'm trying to do something for the team. Maybe I do something that's not so good for me, but I'm going to do it for the team because I know that's going to pay off later in the game. And maybe Chovy can't think like that. Yeah. It is like that.
I mean, and a lot of that's on the coaching staff too, or on his team to give him ideas. Like, there's a player in StarCraft. He was a Brood War player very briefly. Played in, like, the last OSL, and he came into StarCraft 2. You might have heard of him. Innovation. He was a mechanical god. His APM, his ability to macro, was so good that he was extremely dominant player in his top era of StarCraft 2. He's still fairly decent today, but he would always have more units than everybody else because he macroed so well. You'd have more Marines, more Marauders, more Medevacs, and it was just like this endless stream of Terran units killing everything. But then he had, like, a bit of a slump at times when, if he ever got behind, or if someone messed with his build and he couldn't actually get those units out, like, as quickly as he could. It'd be like if a speedrunner gets to a point where they mess up too many steps, they just reset because, like, oh, I can't get to the pace of the game where I'm supposed to. Like, he would struggle to figure out how to transition so many times. And then he joined, SK Telecom's Pro League team. I don't know if it was Coach Park or if it was Uwe at the time who was coaching that team for StarCraft 2, but whoever the main coach was, ended up turning him into an extremely versatile player because up until that moment, he just was macro, just shit out units and, like, I'm going to kill you. And then he would get behind and it would be like, the fans would be like, well, what's going on? Like, why is he failing here? Like, he's not that far behind, like, but he doesn't know what to do. He's not dropping. He always drops, but he's not sending drop ships. Like, what's going on? And I feel like he was a player who needed someone to coach him how to play from behind and how to adapt his builds and actually how to transition in games where he wanted to do a CC first, but then he got cheesed, and then he had to cancel his CC. And how does he transition and get that speed up going again, get his production back going, and actually start doing some harassment on the map instead of just streaming units? And I think that Chovy is a really similar case in terms of, like, in this very micro situation where he's actually playing against minions and one other player in the lane in an isolated case and just never losing and never messing that up. There are ways to, like, improve on what he could do elsewhere on the map. I don't want to say his decision making is bad by any means, but, like, he's not getting enough out of his team, and it's not just necessarily him, but the team isn't utilizing him properly, and, like, that's probably just a coaching error, or the coaches haven't necessarily realized that that's an issue. Because it's hard to even say, like, we need to do more for Chovy when you look at his stats, right? Like, who's the guy who's going to stand up, in the coach meeting and be like, I don't know if Chovy's actually, if we're doing enough with this guy. Like, well, I don't know, wasn't he up 120 CS and, like, he had the most damage in the game and, like, he had the biggest cold lead? Like, who's going to be that guy to stand up and say that?
I'm not even sure they even think about it, because, like, again, like, if they don't realize that, maybe our strong players should help, the weaker players on the team, then why do you put them on Aatrox? Okay, like, you're just going to AFK for, 15, 20 minutes, just, like, not lose. Okay, it doesn't even seem like they're thinking, like, oh, maybe Chovy, should get pressure and then, help us, get the push somewhere else. Seems like a, foreign concept or something like that. Or Sion, for that matter, which, actually, Sion can roam, but, like, still, like, he didn't do very much of that game either, so.